Medieval castle life. From royalty to peasantry, a day in the life. It's been described as an uncomfortable bed with four-poster curtains, a soundtrack of rats and the smell of stale waste. Let's just say that medieval castle life was far from glamorous for most people who lived there. The upper class may have lived in luxury compared to the peasants, but that's not saying much considering that they were surrounded by disease, malnourishment, and death at all times. That being said, the peasants weren't exactly living a life of squalor either. They had their own perks of living in a castle, which may have made them feel lucky compared to those unlucky enough to live outside of its high walls. So what did a typical day look like for both classes? Well, join us today as we look at a day in the life of a medieval castle. The sun hadn't even thought about rising yet, but the royal family was already awake. As soon as it was light enough to see, they would rise from their surprisingly comfortable beds. Don't believe the stereotype that they slept in anything less than comfortable, soft beds. In fact, some were so comfortable that they were difficult to get out of. If you didn't want to get out of bed, the Royal Highness could afford to have servants dress them and do their hair while they took care of business on the throne. Ladies of the court would be doing the same. While the men were getting ready for their day, the women would have their hair washed and styled. This would include the queen, princesses, and any other noble ladies who lived in the castle or were visiting. Once everyone was dressed and groomed, they would meet for breakfast. Since there were no chairs in medieval times, they would either stand around the table or sit on benches while eating. Breakfast wasn't a huge affair, but more of a light meal to get the day started. This might consist of bread, cheese, and wine, though some castles would have fruit and nuts available to eat as well. After breakfast, the king would usually head to his throne room where he would attend to his official duties. This could include meeting with advisors, planning battles, or simply reading documents brought to him by royal scribes. Meanwhile, the queen and other female members of the royal court would oversee the servants and make sure everything was running smoothly within the castle. Around mid-morning, the royal family would take a break from their duties to go on a hunting excursion. Hunting was one of the favorite pastimes of the medieval nobility. It gave them a chance to get away from the castle and enjoy the great outdoors. Plus, it was a good way to get some exercise and fresh air. Most of the time, they would hunt deer or wild boar, but sometimes they would also hunt smaller animals such as rabbits or squirrels. If they were feeling particularly ambitious, they might even try to hunt a bear or a wolf. When they returned from their hunt, they would have lunch, after which they would resume their normal activities. The rest of the day would be spent in the same way, carrying out royal duties, planning for the future, and keeping the kingdom running smoothly. Meanwhile, the peasant life in the castle wasn't quite as leisurely. Peasants were responsible for working long hours in order to provide food, clothing, and other necessities for the people in the castle, including the royal family. They typically worked from sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week with only Sundays off. Men, women, and children all worked as peasants, and they typically did the same jobs as their parents before them. Most of the work was manual labor, such as farming, gardening, cooking, and cleaning. There was little variety in their work, and it was often very repetitive and boring. However, the peasants were quite proud of their work, since it was thanks to them that the people in the castle never went hungry or without clean clothes. In addition, they knew that they were an essential part of the castle community and that their work was vital to the survival of the castle. Overall, while the work was hard and often tedious, the peasants took pride in their work and saw themselves as an integral part of the castle community. For the peasants, breakfast would be a simple affair, consisting of whatever they could find to eat. Luckily, this may have included bread, cheese, and milk, but sometimes it was only porridge or maybe just bread dipped in water. Lunch would likely be similar to breakfast, but dinner was normally a bit better, perhaps including some vegetables or fruit. Despite having a pretty terrible diet compared to the royal family, it's important to keep in mind that at least they were fed. Outside the castle walls, starvation was common, especially during the winter months when food was scarce. As soon as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, the peasants would rise from their straw pallets and begin their daily chores. For the men, this would involve tending to the fields and crops, taking care of livestock, hunting or fishing. Women would take care of the household, cooking, cleaning, washing clothes, and taking care of children. Meanwhile, the little ones would be tasked with gathering firewood, collecting water, or looking after younger siblings. Everyone had to work together to make sure that the castle ran smoothly and that everyone's needs were met, and everyone did their part without complaint. During the medieval period, education was not a priority for most people. Only the wealthy could afford to send their children to school, and most people did not have access to formal education. However, peasants were often well versed in practical knowledge, such as how to farm, hunt, or fish. Children were typically educated at home by their parents, and they learned the skills they needed to survive in their communities. The daily life of a medieval peasant was filled with hard work, but they also found time to socialize and have fun. They would often gather together for festivals and celebrations, and they would participate in local events such as markets and fairs. During these times, they would have a chance to relax and enjoy themselves, and they could also trade goods and services with their neighbors. In addition to socializing, peasants also had to deal with the realities of life in a medieval castle, such as crime and punishment. Crime was relatively rare in medieval villages, But when it did occur, it was dealt with harshly. Punishment was swift and severe, and it was meant to deter people from committing crimes. When the sun began its slow descent towards the horizon, signaling the end of another day, the peasants would return to their humble homes. They would share stories of their day's events over a simple supper, grateful for the day's labor and the company of their loved ones. Their lives may have been filled with hard work and struggle, but they were content in the knowledge that they were an integral part of their community and that their efforts were contributing to the well-being of their village and castle. And now it's time for you to tell us what you think. Which class would you rather live as if you were in a medieval castle? Would you rather be a peasant or a member of the royal family? Why? Also, let us know in the comments section below if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this. And with that, we'll see you next time.